guess some of you have probably been with us since the beginning. Who was at the first meeting in Lund? That's a good crowd, wow. So probably can share my feelings that I've been thinking about that meeting over the last couple of weeks, and it made me feel really old. I never felt old before, but it's been 10 years, and we've had lots of great meetings. I think we've taken on the ambitious task every year of going to a completely new venue and a completely new country, which is not easy by any means, but keeps it interesting. So having been in charge of the first few meetings, I guess I chaired the first 5. It's clear to me how much work goes into these, and it's not always evident to when you come and attend a meeting. So I did want to give a few thanks to the people that are responsible for putting this whole thing together. First, we've got the program committee, which included Caroline Sutton from Taylor and Francis, Liz Ferguson from Wiley, Lucy Oates from OUP, Ilko Verwerda from OAPN, Stuart Taylor from the Royal Society, Xenia Van Eddig from Copernicus, Katrina McCallum from Hindawi, not Ploss. I should know that, right? And Lars Bjornshage from the DOAJ. Oh, I'm Paul Peters, sorry if I forgot that from Hindawi. I'd also like to thank OASPA's amazing staff. There's 2 of them, Claire Redhead and Layla Williams. People often don't realize how small the OASPA executive team is and how much we get done with such a small team, and it's a real credit to the hard work that Claire and Layla put into making this all possible. I'd also like to thank the University of Vienna for making this space available to us, also for sorting out beautiful weather. It looks like we're going to have a great week ahead of us. In terms of practical things, there's a few bits I was told to mention. So first, you've probably noticed that you don't have lots of paper you want to throw away, and that's intentional. We've decided it's silly to have flyers and brochures and merchandise from other publishers, because frankly, I don't know why we would give each other merchandise. So we've had a rule this year: no swag, no nothing. It's, you know, had to break it to the sponsors, and fortunately they were all very understanding that they don't get to send out their merchandise packs. But hopefully that'll mean a lot less waste and nonsense all over the room here. In addition, to keep things as green as possible, you'll notice that you've got OASPA branded lanyards and these little plastic things holding your name tags. Please give those back at the end, because we want to use those again next year and avoid even more waste. In terms of Wi-Fi, if you haven't yet logged on, the network is EduROM. On the back of your name tag is a username and password, and hopefully those all work. If they don't, just pay attention to the speakers and don't check your emails. If you do have internet access and you're one of those people that likes to tweet a lot, that's the hashtag COASP10. Use it, it makes it easier to follow along. Please put your phones on silent if you haven't done so, because that gets annoying. All right, that's most of the practicalities. Did want to thank the sponsors. Given that they don't have merch that is in your hands, we should make sure to recognize them, because they are a huge part of making the conference viable. The sponsors of the registration that you all just went through, Copernicus Publications. And then in addition, we've got platinum sponsors, Hindawi and Springer Nature. Gold sponsors were CCC. Silver sponsors included Sage Publishing and Copernicus. And the bronze sponsors included Crossref, EDP Sciences, Carger OpenAccess, eLife, CLO, Delta Think, Taylor and Francis, and Frontiers. You'll be seeing more of that and more recognition of the sponsors as we go through. So before I turn things over, I did want to mention that at the end of the day today, at the coveted 5:15 slot right before drinks, I'm going to be back here talking about OASPA in a bit more detail. Given that we're at the 10-year mark, I think we really wanted to reflect a bit on where we've come from, where we're at, and where we're going. And I know some of you might be tempted to use that time to run back to your hotels, do whatever before the drinks. Highly discourage that. If you do, you might not know how to get your free drinks. So in addition to listening to me talk, you gotta come. Yeah, I guess that's about it for me for the moment. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker of the day, Falk Reckling. Dr. Reckling has been working for the Austrian Science Fund, also known as the FWF, since 2001. They're Austria's leading funder of scientific research. He's been the head of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, and then in 2013 became the head of the Department of Strategy, Policy, Evaluation, and Analysis, and he's also responsible for the open science policy of the FWF.
Okay, dear colleagues, on behalf of the president of the Austrian Science Fund, Clement Tockner, who unfortunately cannot be here today, I welcome all of you to this conference. I would like to take the opportunity here to highlight the importance that, from our point of view, OASPA has to redefine the relationship between funders and publishers. When I now use the term funders, I always mean both research performing organizations and research funding organizations. From a funder's point of view, in the recent years, we had a little bit the impression that the relationship between funders and publishers is somewhat broken and sometimes characterized by allegations listed here, at least from the funder's point of view. And I'm not suggesting that all allegations listed here are correct, but I do think some points give cause to rethink the relationship between funders and publishers. And initiatives have been taken in the last couple of years that want to change that relations. The first one is from Paul. It's a fine example that not a funder but a publisher is giving us some hints how the relations could be worked in the future. This nice blog from last year about the principles of open science infrastructure. A second one is, of course, the important initiative by the Max Planck Society, OA 2020. Another one are the 5 open access principles for negotiations with publishers by the Association of European Research Libraries, LIBER, which were just recently supported by the Declaration of Rights and Principles to Transform Scholarly Communications by the Universities of California. And my former boss, the president of the Austrian Science Fund, Christoph Kratky, proposed 5 years ago in Nature an alliance of funding organizations to enforce open access. And that is what we now have, namely the Alliance, Coalition S, and Plan S. Under the leadership of Robert Jan Smits and Mark Schiltz of Science Europe, Plan S formulates 10 principles that publishers are expected to implement in order to achieve full open access publishing. Right now, the Coalition S consists of 13 funding organizations, but it can be expected that other organizations will follow soon, and even organizations currently unable to sign Plan S will nevertheless cooperate quite closely on many points. But Robert Jan Smits will report more about that in detail tomorrow. We should also keep in mind that we are not start from scratch. There are a lot of successful initiatives from the current years, and some of them, like, for example, like the transformative agreements with subscription publishers. And I remember when we present together with the Austrian Library Consortium 5 years ago at the 5th OASPA meeting in Riga, a first model of that, most of people said publisher will never do that. Today we have several agreements in several countries with several publishers, but we made quite clear from the very beginning that our transition models, we need in the future full open access publishing models. And there are, of course, other initiatives like first open contracts between publishers and funders are existing in the Netherlands, in Sweden, and also in Austria. We have a lot of new publications and business models. And finally, there are initiatives for an open access infrastructure like DOAJ, like Romeo Sherpa Open Citations, or the Austrian-based open knowledge maps. To drive these development forward, I would like now briefly propose 3 core principles and 6 operational principles that members of OASPA and their partners could adopt, starting with the 3 core principles. The function of publishers and funders is to fulfill the normative essence of science and scholarship. That means making research more open, transparent, and comprehensible. The second one is, for their texts and works, the public and the scientific community have a legitimate right to be supplied with open products and adequate services at transparent costs and conditions. And the third one is, for their services, publishers have, of course, also a legitimate right to receive an adequate compensation. The operational principles. Researchers can publish open access in all academic venues without delay. All publication venues should follow strict rules of transparency and integrity and have to be registered in standard databases. Copyright. Authors hold copyright of their publication with no restrictions. All publication must be published on an open license. Fourth one, all data related to publications, means full text, metadata, supporting data, citation data, must be freely available via open standards, making unrestricted text and data mining possible. Research data, whenever legally and ethically possible, or research data and similar materials underlying the publications have to be openly deposited in a repository applying the standards of trusted entities. And the final one, the agreements between publishers and funders, including costs, terms, and conditions, and services, have to be openly accessible. Despite the various interests of funders and publishers, I'm optimistic that there will be a productive partnership between research performing organizations, research funding organizations, and publishers in the future. The precondition for this can be summed up in one word, and that is openness. And the Open Access Scholarly Publisher Association could be an important platform to enforce that. Finally, I would like to congratulate the organizers. I personally haven't seen such an interesting program with so many excellent speakers in a long time, and I wish you here an exciting discussion, and thank you for your attention.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to welcome you at COASP 10 on behalf of the University of Vienna, and I'm particularly pleased that the organizers have chosen the University of Vienna as the venue for the 10th anniversary. My first contact with OASPA was in 2010, 2 years after it was founded. 2010, that was 8 years ago, and in open access time units, this is a very long time. In 2010, we made our first steps with open access. We had a Biomed Central membership, and our repository FIDRA was already online, but only few researchers at the University of Vienna knew about open access, about the details, which is why we organized an Open Access Information Day in March 2010. And Caroline Sutton, she's also here today, was the OASPA president at that time, and we invited her, and she introduced the work of OASPA to the participants. And the title of her presentation was, you see it here, The Different Flavors of Open Access Publishing. So if you are curious which open access topics were discussed in 2010, then you can watch this talk and all the other talks on our repository, FEDRA. Caroline visited the University of Vienna a second time in December 2012, together with Lars Björnsauge. He's director of the DOHA, and they advised our rectorate on an open access strategy and the establishment of an open access publishing fund. The 10th anniversary of COASP is an occasion to take stock. So what's the current status of open access from my perspective? While open access has developed continuously in the last 10 years, it wasn't a revolution, but an evolution. Here is a timeline. Today we are in the transition phase from a subscription world to a fully open access world. And many people criticize that it's very expensive to have both systems in parallel and that the transition is much too slow, like this. I totally agree with this, and I think there is a need for accelerating the transition like this. Okay, nevertheless, the open access progress of the last few years has been enormous, so open access is highly relevant everywhere today. We have a lot of open access services at the universities. We have open access publishing funds, we have repositories, we have open access offices. The funders, they have mandatory open access policies. An open access infrastructure has developed in the recent years, for example, OpenAir, Scope 3, DOHA, OAPEN, Zenodo. Last but not least, open access has become very important for all publishing houses. The number of open access journals has increased enormously. We now have more than 12,000 journals in the DOHA. And there are now 8 gold open access journals in the top 20 journals with the most publications in Web of Science. I think that's really amazing. So you, the OASPA and its members, have contributed a lot to all these developments and the changes of the publishing culture. The COASP is primarily a conference for open access publishers. Nevertheless, the work of OASPA is very important for libraries. First, OASPA has an important role in the quality assurance of open access. So OASPA guarantees high quality publishing due to its membership criteria. This summer we had a lively discussion about predatory publishing in the Austrian media, and for librarians who have to approve open access funding applications every day, it's very important to have reliable partners like the DOHA on a journal level and OASPA on a publisher level. And second, OASPA is very important because as a library we need to work together with many OASPA publishers. For example, in matters of our Open Access Publishing Fund, our Open Access Membership, and Open Access deals. A high acceptance of open access can only be achieved if we find the best possible solutions for the authors together. That brings me to the point that is particularly important to me, namely the open access deals with publishers. These deals include an additional open access component in traditional subscription contracts. And in my opinion, this was a very important open access development of the last years. As you may know, Austria is one of the countries that had these deals very early on. The first so-called offsetting deal in history was the Austrian open access deal with Institute of Physics Publishing, already in 2014. Here it is. And in addition to IOP, we now have open access contracts with many publishers, for example, Emerald, Royal Society of Chemistry, Sage, Springer, Taylor & Francis, and Wiley. Next question is, what impact do these deals have on open access? So they support open access publishing in subscription journal, so it's support for the hybrid model. And this type of open access has often been heavily criticized, especially because of the problem of double dipping. And the hybrid model is not compliant with the new Plan S, but as mentioned in the preamble of Plan S, it's acceptable if there is an open access deal. However, I think hybrid open access in combination with open access deals is a good solution to avoid or reduce double dipping and to move forward with the open access transition. So these deals are transformation deals, and the goal is that these hybrid journals flip to fully open access journal. And one more positive effect, with these deals, many researchers who have never published open access before could be brought on board of the open access board, could be on board of the open access movement. For the first time, they were able to publish in their journals in which they had always published, in a process that is very simple and without article processing charges. What I want to say, for many researchers, these deals are an extremely positive first contact with open access, and maybe they will publish in fully open access journals the next time. In this respect, these deals have greatly strengthened open access, in my opinion. All in all, thousands of articles by Austrian authors could be offered open access in the last year. So these deals are an important step towards nationwide open access in Austria. For example, this diagram shows the result for the Austrian Springer Compact deal. It shows a change from closed access to open access in 2016. Because all important publishers are here today, I would like to take this opportunity to formulate a wish regarding open access workflows. Open access deals are a good thing, but only if the workflow works. From our perspectives, not all publishers have yet realized how important open access workflows are. If the open access workflow is good, 90 to 100% of the publications covered by the contract can be published open access. If there are problems in the workflow, not even 10% are reached. So the top priority for every publisher should be the improvement of their open access workflows. I'd like to recommend a hopefully interesting article regarding this topic, which was published by our library team in UKSG Insights number 31 this summer, and the title is The Weakest Link, Workflows in Open Access Agreements, the Experience of the Vienna University Library and Recommendations for Future Negotiations. As best practice, I would like to refer to the ESAC recommendations for open access workflows. One of the key points is that publishers automatically recognize eligible authors in order to be able to start with the open access workflow. And the second crucial point is the development of good web interfaces for authors. These must be so well designed that every author can be guided through the open access workflow intuitively and without problems. I think we will have the opportunity to discuss all these issues here at COASP 10. In times of open access deals, good collaboration between libraries and publishers and also funders is more important than ever. I wish you exciting and productive discussions at COASP 10 at the University of Vienna. Thank you.